Star Citizen is a game I love to hate and I hate to love. It is filled with odd design paradoxes in almost every facet. I like to think of it as the video game version of The Room, where it often feels like sometimes the developers have gone out of their way to try their hardest, but yet somehow still miss the entire point of what they were trying to achieve and come out with these completely odd, in a bad way, results. But the results are so confoundingly bad, you can't help but admire it in a weird way. I'm going to fixate here on one particular thing that bugs the hell out of me in this game, and that's the overall user experience. But I'm going to fixate and kind of go a little further in on one specific thing, and that's the interaction system. The interaction system has changed a couple times. The first iteration of this, as far as I remember, was just called Inner Thought. And I have some clips of it here because there are some artifacts of it left over in the current persistent universe. Basically, all it was a list of items that would be tied or anchored to the object that you wanted to interact with. Now, this system had a ton of problems because when you're trying to interact with something, you don't want to be playing a mini game where you're trying to essentially target the target, track it with your mouse, and then while targeting that target, also then scroll through a list of items or pick the list in the item. It doesn't make sense that to interface with something with intention, the result is that you have to play a hand-eye coordination game to get a result. It doesn't make any sense. If I have an intention to do something, and like the system is called inner thought, all I should have to do is select it. A static list or some intuitive way to basically just pick what I want to do with the cursor. It shouldn't be a game of skill to select the thing I want to do. The skill is what I'm deciding to do, right? Now, they knew this was problematic. CIG knew this was problematic, and they redesigned this entire system. But the funny thing is, they didn't actually solve the problem. So now we have PIT, the Personal Inner Thought System, which has instead decided to put things into a radial menu. Everything. Everything goes into a radial menu. With the caveat that there is a primary action seated on just tapping F, because before you would hold F, it brings up the cursor. That's how you interact with inner thought. Now you can tap F to take the primary action, or hold F to bring up a radial menu and then make the decision. That's the way it should ideally work. It doesn't actually work this way sometimes. Sometimes the primary action fails to do anything. Sometimes there's no primary action, or sometimes the primary action doesn't really feel like it's connected to what you should actually be doing. It doesn't feel like it's the correct primary action. Now I'm going to look at one specific scenario here that I think illustrates everything wrong with this system and why it still has failed to address the core problem of inner thought in this game. We're looking at a bed. This is the ship bed. And the idea here is I want to lie down and I want a bed log out of the game. Sounds simple, right? No, it is not simple at all. Firstly, the default primary action is sit. Why is it sit? Why is that the primary action for me looking at a bed? When I look at a bed, the first thing I want to do is probably lie down. That's the purpose of the bed. So, okay. Instead, we have to bring up pit. We bring up pit, we get the radial menu, anchored center in the screen, select lie down. That works. Now, once we've actually lied down, I now need to log out. How do I log out? Okay. At any time, you can always bring up the pit menu if there isn't an obvious action in front of you to do. I don't see an obvious action. Bring up the pit menu. No way to log out. I see get up, I don't see log out. It's missing. Now, is it missing because there's a bug, or is it missing because the feature is no longer here? Or is it missing because CIG is hoping to take that feature out of rotation or replace it with something else? I have no idea. But if we fish around the screen, eventually we will see a anchored get up action that's kind of hidden away in the corner. So again, CIG really hasn't addressed the issue. The issue is not addressed. I am still fishing for an action point for the intention of what I want to do. Okay, I find the action point. I bring up the pit menu, and now you can see, for some reason, the radial menu is not anchored in the center of the screen. I have never played a video game where a radial menu decides to be offset and centered around the initial action point for bringing up the radial menu. It makes no sense. A radial menu is supposed to present an ease of use for action, but instead, the radial menu is anchored to the action point itself, which means that it's offset, which means that the items get obfuscated by the viewport of the display, which means that I can hardly see all of the items. But if you do notice, there is a logout item there. It does exist, and that is how we log out. Now, I only know this because I've fought to find this. And in every ship, you'll see there is issues like this. You will have to fish for that icon. It's not just on bed logging. Sometimes it's getting out of the seat. If you don't know the hotkey for getting out of a seat, good luck on finding the icon, because it is probably hidden or probably in a weird spot that you would never think to look. And why do I have to look over my left shoulder to find the icon to get out of my seat? I have no idea. But this is the way things are designed in Star Citizen. This is the way things work.